Hey, let's do this. Brink, Ivy Studios, their latest. A little bit of combinations of Fractured Sky, Moonrakers, and Catan? Question mark? Yeah, I went there. But let me explain before you judge. Let me tell you, is it right for you? Who is it right for? What are you going to like? What may you not like? You ready? They sent it to me to talk about. Let's go. So what is Brink? Brink is 3 rounds of spacefaring, explorative, manipulation, trading, negotiating, bluffing, bidding, and scoring, with many of these dynamic elements on the board that you see in front of you. What do you need to know? Let's go through it for the second time because I forgot to hit play the first time. And then I'll tell you my thoughts on it, right? The essential nature of Brink as a whole is you have 3 ships, if I can actually hold them without the attachments falling off. 1, 2, and 3. All of them are different sizes. And unlike Yoda, size does matter here in this situation, because how these ships are placed is going to dynamically influence what's going on the map in the first place. The 1, the 2, and the 3. The 1 gets placed in the middle of the hex, the 2 gets placed on a border, and then the 3 gets placed at a vertice. And then, as you're exploring this, if you place them on edges, you will gradually explore new tiles. And you don't even have a limitation to having just 1, because if you placed it on an edge vertice over here, you could potentially explore 2, and you can see then how the map starts to grow. And when you place them, that's also going to dictate what resources you're gathering. So you gather resources based on what this is on. So a blue, and then I get the ambassador action, or I get the card action, the ambassador action, 1 orange and 2 red, and similarly and so on with all of these. And there's some overlapping interplay, and this is the Catan-esque nature in the first sense that I was talking about, because you're going to place these one at a time, other people are going to place their ships, and you're going to alternate. There's no order in which you need to place them. 3 2 1, 1 2 3, 2 3 1, 3 1 2, whatever you want to do in that sense, that's going to help you in the order in which you need to derive your combinations of factors, resources, and actions on a turn-by-turn basis, because essentially you have 9 turns, because you only play 3 rounds like I mentioned. Well, what are you doing, Chris, in order to win this game? Well, you are gathering these resources, and then you're bidding in order to give power to a faction that you want to win, that you're occupying the most of on the board, that then your power gets multiplied by an end of round multiplier bonus, essentially. And then rinse and repeat twice more. So what you're doing, though, after this, you're going to be having a menagerie of stuff on the board of those actions, icons, things I mentioned, right? Resources, as you can see here, come in all 5 of the different flavors that we saw. And the number of resources available actually does matter in this game, because if you run out, you cause a revolt. And you may want to cause a revolt because, this is a little take that, but if I cause the resource pool to be out, everybody loses half of those resources that they have. So high risk, high reward. How do you feel about that? The other aspect of things is this is going to be crowded. It's going to be a little bit more so at the higher player counts. It also is mainly a 3 to 5 player game. You can play with 2 people. However, there is a dummy player that you're going to have to deal with. And how do you feel like that? No, not me, but an actual, game individual player separate. So what you're doing on a turn-by-turn basis, though, is you're laying these 3 ships down. Once everybody has their 3 ships down, you're sum totaling up your power on the board via, first off, hidden betting. Because what you're going to be having here is you're going to have your little plastic shield in front of you, and you're going to put this down, covering up the 4 different areas that are going to have the colors that we just talked about. And so what you do then is, based on the resources that you've gathered, you put a certain amount down there of who you want to get what advantage. Purples are wild. We'll talk about that later. But then this adds to the power, the total power here in some combination, and then you see who has the most power. You'll notice that I didn't put any red down. Red actually detract from areas of power. So you want to be careful who gets the red tokens when you place them into your slots, because that's where the dynamic is going to come in, right? You're looking and saying, okay, well, Chris is over here with, a bunch of blue and a bunch of blue. So, maybe I want to put a bunch of red tokens on the blue one here, or maybe I would have done this And maybe I wouldn't even place these, because the other element of this happens that when you sum total these up, only the top 2 score. So first place in the first round gets 3 points per power influence that you have. So if I have 10 power of blue in this round, well, then I get 30 points of victory points. But the second place gets a 2 times multiplier. Second round, it's 4 and 2. Third round, it's 4 and 3. But the tricky part there is, and why I might not spend these, just, trying to get green up in case I'm second place in green, is that if you are first or second, you lose those resources. But if you're third or fourth, you do get them back. So it's a little bit of push your luck in that sense. On the other side of the board here, we'll talk about this since we've already got it out. We have both the cargo and the railguns, and that's what was on my little ships here before I so unceremoniously dropped them earlier. And so what you do is you slowly navigate up your track here, and as you pay for these resources, the blues and then the yellows, or oranges, sorry, and then the reds, and you get to the top finally, you get 15 points. But as you're going along the way, you're having to choose one side or the other, the cargo or the railgun. The cargo becomes very important, because if you play on a cargo, then you get double the amount of resources that this ship would normally gather. So normally this ship would gather a green, 2 purple, and 2 blue resources for me. But in this case, I would get 2 green, 4 purple, and 4 blue. Now you're seeing where it goes. But the railgun gives you that oh so tempting and illustrious power that we were just talking about, and it gives anything that this touches now +1 power for my end of round scoring. So therein lies the yin and the yang. You'll also notice, if you're paying very close attention to this board right now, that those resources I just mentioned, they're not all actually the same. And that's because some of them have a little black outline, some of them have a little white outline. And that matters. And this is where this is going to be the biggest make it or break it, I would argue, slightly more than the player count, slightly more than the dynamics of anything else that this game has to offer. Because it's a little bit of side reel in a nutshell. What you're doing, essentially, is saying, if this is black, this goes into my straight resource pool. Spend it how I may, when I may, in whatever manner I so choose. However, if it's a white one, they get placed instead in front of your board. And those have to be taken care of before your end of turn, this turn. Because if you don't, they just go the way of the dodo. What I mean by that is I need to trade this. So when they go into my resource pile, they're influence. I am influencing other areas, other aspects of the game. The bidding, the buying, the factions, the power, anything else along those lines. But if they're going in front of me, they are favors, meaning favors go away very quickly. And if you want to capitalize on those favors, I have to give these favors, asterisk, trade them with someone else for something else. And therein lies the biggest dilemma. Do you have the dynamic on the table that will create the balance of the trading, a la your other Catan reference there? Because I can just trade these for any resource, anybody else. Only on my turn, only they can trade with me. Very similar. But again, what do I trade it for? How much do I trade it for? Are you having people that are willing to trade? It's a little bit of Moonrakers in that sense as well when you're doing the shared missions. Who's willing to participate in what resources? And if that game didn't work for you, again, this game, a little bit of these elements, this might be a little bit of a tougher sell. Because again, these are gone after. So you may be scrambling because purples are wild and purples are super powerful, but if no one's offering me anything, I just might have to take 5 cents on the dollar in order to get something instead, or not, right? That's the dynamic, because am I just giving them away to make my opponents that much more powerful, and really kind of power discrepancy there? They're getting too sweet of a deal, if you will. The other elements on the board, we have a lot of card mitigation. We've got a lot of asymmetric powers. We've got a little bit of everything in those regards. Like I said, putting down the hex tiles. You have 5 actually of different in-game faction objectives that are going to dynamically change the game as a whole. And they're going to add power to these areas. They're going to basically give you other shapes that are going to float on the board that are either going to add power or add influence or add resources or take away. And they're going to be movable. and they're going to be unlockable as you reach some of these resources here cost-wise in the upper hand corner, and whoever gets that is going to, well, benefit the most because they're going to have control of it. You'll also notice that this, just like the ambassador cards, which we'll talk about in a second, have resource requirements and power requirements, meaning it's a sum total of both of those, which is really nice because resources are not infinite, but power does not get used up. So I have power down here of the blue, which is going to make it cost a lot less resource-wise to begin with. And similarly with the ambassador cards here, a combination of 3 purple resources or power from the red spaces. So if I had my red spaces here, that might be essentially almost all I need in order to buy this card, because then that goes to my action driven combo system down here of when I'm placing, when I have the alliance, when I have the cards, the action cards or the rider cards that I'm going to be getting, because again, the ambassador cards are going to be in-game actions that you're going to be taking, and then you have your action cards that are also going to be very similar in ways of mitigating, enhancing, or just getting upgrades, powers, resources ad nauseum based on the different faction that they are in the first place. Last up, you have your rider cards, which again are going to give you more victory conditions and other ways of asymmetrically affecting the game or the vote even potentially on when you get to play them. So that is the game in a nutshell. And so what are my thoughts on it and where are things at? Well, there's a lot of things going on. Biggest divisive element, pro and con, right, is that dynamic of trading or not trading your resources. If you don't have a group that likes trading resources, if you don't have a group that's going to be dynamic and love interplay on the tabletop, that is going to be multiplayer solitaire-ish, right? This game is going to fall completely and utterly flat for you. You're not going to like it whatsoever. You aren't. It takes the Catan elements, and that's going to rub people the wrong way when I say it. But as I mentioned, right, the trading and the placement on a hex-based situation is akin to that. But it's a little bit different in a Fractured Sky bidding style of way too, so it separates itself out. But again, is there enough mitigation? And the answer is, well, that's going to depend on your group, because you're going to have control of where you want to go if you can go sooner, potentially. It's going to be potentially strategic if you're going sooner, but if you're not going sooner, you're going to have to make apple salad out of apples here, and you're going to have to be very tactical on where you're placing and what's left, because placement rules, as well as, well, what's out on the board for me to do in the first place. And so it's going to be heavily tactically driven, which ultimately may behoove you then to start exploring when you otherwise might not be incentivized, right? I mean, that's the big downside of something like Expeditions, where it's this static grid of this is this row, this is this row, this is this row, and they're kind of all similar and you're not really that modular and movable. This is completely adaptable and it's going to be completely out there. And as you add things to it, it's going to not only change the where and the combination. See, I grabbed the cargo and without the ship. Now that 3 is going to be dynamically different than this 3. And as we explore this board and slowly expand it, it's going to give me more options. But it's a little high risk, high reward too, because I may not get the color I'm looking for when it flips up, because again, no way of knowing, no way of mitigating. But that's where the ambassador cards come in. That's where the action cards come in. This is heavily card mitigation driven. It's going to have to be in order to manage the chaos that is present on this portion of the board in the first place. Now, there's always the, ubiquitous Catan trading in, bunch of resources for this, or purple resource for 2 of these, because purple is wild, and purple kind of changes things, and you can use purple for bidding power influence of any color or any kind. So, you have some mitigation there too. You also have ways on the backs of these cards. So if you just don't like the cards or you can't really use them in a way you want to, right, you can just flip it over and use it for the purple wild resource there. Or on the backs of these ambassador cards, if I show you them, right, 2 blues, 2 greens, a purple, 2 yellows, 2 oranges. So you get ways of dealing with them if you don't want to use them for what they have on this side as well. So it gives you ways to manipulate that. This is one of those things too that I just always wonder about, and I'm always amazed, but also can't ever really speak to the exact nature of it, right? When you start talking about the power dynamics with the bidding here, right? And the multipliers over here of the 3s and the 4s and the 2s and the first places, the second places, and then the power here, right? There has to be so much fine tuning in there That's what I worry about is, how much manipulation, how much flexibility is going to be there. Because, if it's just slightly off multiplier wise, that can lead, a big difference in the actual scores. The other mixed element for a lot of people, right, is going to be the bidding, the blind bidding, because you're going to lose your resources if you score, but you're going to keep your resources if you don't. So how do you feel about that? Is that going to be something that you are going to enjoy? Because it sort of gives you a safety net, so you fall forward a little bit if your faction doesn't win and you don't score. But at the same time, it doesn't also make you necessarily go all out for it, because you're only really playing 3 rounds and you'd only have 3 chances to score. So you really kind of have to go guns a-blazing at times. I really like the decision making between the cargo and the railgun. I like the upgrade path in that sense that it doesn't automatically nail you to one side or the other. The other element of things, again, that's going to be a make it or break it for people to go right along with that voting, is a lot of these rider cards will affect the voting. This first one right here, right in front of you. After voting, discard the amount of action cards you want for -1 vote power each, essentially. So if you're gathering up those, action cards, because you can do that down here, and just gather and gather, you can really swing the vote that way. But that's where a lot of your turn and actions are going to be spent in the first place of placement. So you're going to sacrifice one for the other. So is it really going to behoove you to be as take that as you may want to be in the first place? And it sort of has a mixed vibe on that side of things, right? There is some take that in terms of the voting and the influence. There's no direct conflict apart from the placement on the board itself. But it's going to feel like there is conflict when you're yinging and yanging, tugging and pulling on those, power influences at the end of every round, trying to, sabotage someone else's while potentially helping one of your opponents in addition. Because like I said, there's only 4 colors that you're scoring. So, right? Somebody is going to end up helping somebody else, especially at the higher player counts. And that's going to be the dynamic, is you may hurt someone and help someone at the same time, and it may ultimately hurt you more in the same way. There's more going on with this game, and I like it more than Fractured Sky, just because you have some of those elements. Fractured Sky is ultimately probably a little bit more random for my personal tastes, of just the blind bidding and the very, very limited action resources that you're sort of having to navigate between, of putting down your buildings, putting down your ships, managing the troops between them. I like the activation of your actually Catan-esque elements of putting them down and doing it. I love the ambassador cards, the action cards, and the rider cards. I have mixed feelings about these elements of the different factions, just because, it sort of feels like an element that could be an expansion that could be included or not included, right? When you start looking at these cards, for example, the UA flagship gives -1 power to the sector that it sits on. So if you just get it set on your sector, you get a little bit kingmaking because a player controls that. The shield lattice gives +1 power. The UA trade agreement over here, you place 2 red cubes on all sectors that are red. And then you get one of them extra, so you get a way to dampen someone else's influence in a different way along that line. And then the fusion core gives your ability to move your ship someplace else for power influencing end of round, but not for like getting a second set of actions and resources. So I feel like that is a little bit of, you could play without it and not necessarily miss it either from that standpoint. So who is this right for? You have a 3, 4, or 5 player, very dynamic, loving interplay, meta negotiating table. This is not going to be a 2-player game. This is not going to be a multiplayer solitaire loving game. This is going to be highly tactical with a smidge of strategy lover smoked in there as a whole. But again, some of those same elements may not be to your choosing. You have a tableau of the ambassador cards that are available to you. You have the ability to use the resource on the other side. But ultimately, some of this is just going to be completely out of your control, like the placement. So if you're a control freak, this is going to not suit you whatsoever. And again, because this deck is so big, it's great because, dynamically asymmetric and unique, but also you just may not get the one you want, and you're never going to get all through them even in one game. So you might not even know what's there in the first place in order to mitigate, to optimize, or to have something at your availability. And again, same thing with the Hexploration, right? The Hexploration over here and over here is going to be great because it's going to give you more spots, to give you more options as you're going along. And you can see that, well, some of these are 1s with action, some of these are 3s. And whether you go with the cargo or, you go with the railgun to get extra power there, whatever that may be, it's going to give you options, but it's also going to be high risk, high reward when you all of a sudden flip over this one when I was really hoping for a red, a blue, or something else along those lines, because I don't have any way to change that now. My ship's stuck there for that whole round, and I only get to place 9 times in 3 rounds total. So that's going to be very tricky in how you're balancing that element of things, because again, I had no clue when I placed that there that that's going to be 2 of those orange cubes and in either or action, and I might have needed something else along those lines altogether. And that's the risk reward. You go on the edge. So you're losing a lot of control in that way for Hopium, if you will. Where does it fall in terms of my love for IV Studios games to compare it to the other ones, right? Mythic Mischief is still my favorite. That's hands down my favorite. With the expansions coming out from Veiled Fate is probably still second, just with the higher player count and the dynamics that those expansions offer just to give the base game, well, just that much better, frankly speaking. This and Fractured Sky are probably among the next, to be frank with you. But Fractured Sky is going to be much easier to hit the table and a rules overhead, even though, personally speaking, mechanically, this one is probably more solid in terms of what I prefer, and the little bit of chaos mixed in with a little bit of tactics, or a lot of tactics, and a wee bit of strategy as well. But it's going to be a bigger curve, too, of managing this, and this, and this, and this, and this, right? I, frankly speaking, not a huge bidding fan. I just don't do it well. I am not good at bidding. I think of games like Isle of Skye even, where I'm bidding for tiles. Like, I never know if it's too much, too little, how much other resources do people have. That just, my mind doesn't work like that. So that mechanic for me is really a hard sell sometimes. And that's probably the other element that I mentioned and I talked about, the Revolt, where because you have resources limited on a round by round, turn by turn basis, that's potentially going to be a little bit off-putting because you can hate resource draft. If I know there are very few of a certain resource down, I may purposely go to that area if I know you're stacking up on them to screw you. And that's going to be part of the king-making, anti-king-making personality of, take that in this game. But it's also going to piss people off. And then maybe they're not going to trade with you. And they're going to hold that grudge against you. And that dynamic is what makes people not really like Catan in the first place, right? Because that's really the core crux of, if you can get people to do that, you're going to do better. And if you can't, just because someone, just holds it against you for legitimate or not so great reasons, like my 10-year-old last night coming home and I hadn't even seen him, but hating me for something that happened 3 hours earlier, there's nothing you can do about it. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on IV Studios Brink. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns down below, and we'll see where it goes. As always, thanks for watching. Stay classy. Have a great freaking day. Who forgot to turn on the overhead camera the first time they filmed it?